Welcome to Roundtable Decision. I am your host, Wyatt Birkenoff, and for today's video, we're going to talk about Ross Perot, an American businessman, Texas businessman, as well as a former politician and presidential candidate, even though he never became president. And a lot of people have compared Ross Perot to the first Trump, or a semi-Trumpy type of personality. So I was going to play this video first.
Nobody else will even talk about it. I've said it's like a crazy ant in the basement. Everybody knows she's there, but nobody talks about it. Now, whose fault is that? Not the Democrats, not the Republicans. Somewhere out there's an extraterrestrial that's doing this to us, I guess. And everybody says they take responsibility. Somebody somewhere has to take responsibility for this. Now, just for the record.
Oops.
I don't have any spin doctors. I don't have any speech writers. Probably shows. I make those charts you see on television even. That shows. Since we're dealing with voodoo economics, a great young lady from Louisiana sent me this voodoo stick, and I will use it as my pointer tonight.
So obviously, Ross Perot was very much of a humorous type of personality, and he was straightforward in the way he spoke. He was not very politician type. Even though he was way more politician type than what Trump is, he is much more of a funny businessman, so to speak. And he was very honest, which a lot of people think Trump seems very honest compared to the average businessman like Clinton, Bill Clinton, and even George W. Bush. So I was going to read the political article, what originally was from this campaign. So Ross Perot died early Tuesday morning at age 89, and this is on July 9th, an event that surely left many Americans with an embarrassed thought. Wait, what? I am pretty sure I thought he was already dead. The contrast between the etiquette of Perot's last aging years and the blaring trumpets of his 20th century business and political career is so wide that it takes some effort to now recall how large his cocksure Texas bateman once loomed. Perot said cozy insider self-dealing had corrupted Washington and was screwing over average Americans, a similar claim to what Trump makes going on. And he complained that free market agreements like NAFTA was a raw deal for workers and a larger economy. This message from 1992 is a linear ancestor of one of those echoes to the same degree in both parties and valued Trump to the presidency in 2016. He also said budget defects of some $250 billion annually would bankrupt the country, a message that sounds quaint in a time of trillion-dollar defects that even one-time fiscal hawks no longer are especially adequate about. What if Perot had waged an independent candidacy that captured 18.9% of the vote in 1992? There's a good chance that there would have never been a Clinton presidency. The question of whether Perot would take more votes from Bill Clinton or George W. Bush speared endless and ultimately intolerable post-election analysis among pollsters and political scientists. There wasn't much doubt, however, among operators close to both candidates over who the beneficiary was for the real-world impact. Perot, who loathed Bush, amplified Clinton's criticism of the GOP incumbent, and at an important juncture spoke approvingly of Clinton and his running mate, Al Gore. He gave conservative-leaning swing voters who didn't like Bush a safe alternative to Clinton. Clinton ultimately paid the price for the Perot phenomenon when the Texan ran again in 1996 as the former Reform Party. He never factored heavily in outcome, but still commanded 8% of the vote, leaving Clinton capped at 49%. While Clinton is sometimes laughed at as the most agile national party in modern times, he, unlike George W. Bush or Barack Obama, never won majority support in the presidential election. And this is some quotes from Perot. As I said, he's almost a very funny businessman, and I'm doing this video to honor what he's done and talk a little bit about the conspiracy they mentioned as I wrote an article what I'm going to talk about later. If you see a snake, he said, just kill it. Don't appoint a committee on snakes. The federal debt was like a crazy ant we keep down in the basement. The most intractable problems of the government, he promised, could be fixed by letting him get under the hood, in the same way he had gotten rich as the founder and CEO of Electric Data Systems. Part of the Perot mythology in a story letter clipped away by the skeptics was how he deployed a private commando team to rescue 2 employers from the Iran in 1979. Conspiracy theories were always a part of his appeal, as with his claim with the first Bush administration was surprisingly knowledge of POWs still alive in Vietnam. But sometimes Perot Reagan's streak turned simply weird. He surprised people in the summer of 1992 by dropping out of the presidential race, offering praise for the challenge that Clinton and Gore were presenting to the older Bush. Then he surprised people in line by dropping back in the race. In a bizarre moment, he claimed without substantiation that the Republican operators had tried to sabotage his daughter's wedding. So there was a lot of conspiracy theories within Perot and how he ran his political campaigns, as this next article talks about from NR. Perot's 19% of the vote nationwide in 1992 looks amazing in retrospect, and his 9% 4 years later is almost as impressive. No one had achieved a bigger share of the vote as a third-party candidate. See, that's the big thing, is he ran as a third-party candidate. And a lot of people think that Trump, although he ran as a Republican, is very much a third-party candidate. And in today's time, we have the Libertarian Party, which has the biggest third-party consensus as far as voting. And Gary Johnson won a very low percentage of the overall election vote from the previous presidential election, compared to Perot, who gained 19% of the vote nationwide and 9% 4 years later. So he's already, even 4 years later with this 9%, way more than what Gary Johnson has been able to come up with. As it says here, Pat Bushman, Ralph Nader, Jill Stein, Gary Johnson, nobody's even come close to Perot's performance since 1996. Perot dispelled any notion that a major presidential candidate had to come out of central casting. So that was a big point I wanted to hint on, as well as starting from here. Depending on your point of view, Perot and Clinton either tapped into latent American anxiety in the early 1990s, or they convinced Americans that things had gone terribly wrong, when in fact they were going okay, as noted by George H.W. Bush. Passed away. On the campaign trail, Bill Clinton described a struggling, desperate America. Ross Perot declared in his book, "Unless we take action now, our nation may comfort a situation similar to the Great Depression and maybe even worse." That looks pretty hyperbolical considering how the 1990s turned out. So that was kind of a short little article on that. And as I mentioned before, I wrote an article on if there will ever be a greater third party in the next presidential election. And so I highlighted any mentions that I made of Ross Perot, as I saw a very big similarity between Ross Perot and Donald Trump. And I'll read what I had to say. Political parties have changed names throughout history, and America's democratic system under the Constitution remains strong. Moreover, guidelines for presidential order facilitated by businessman and founder of Electronic Data Systems, Ross Perot, nomination and presidency in the race of 1992. A Texan Perot team discovered that a political party must follow formation guidelines, and I talked about what it takes to become a political party in Texas, since that is where I live. And at least now you need 47,183 signatures. And this is why the Libertarian Party is also having a hard time really breaking through, as there is very big milestones they have to reach in order to receive federal funding, as I mentioned later in the article. But it's very hard to achieve the federal funding, even though the Libertarian Party was able to do so in the last presidential election. Going on. The nomination of Ross Perot in 1992 for president reflects one of those moments when the wild horse nation stuck its head in the flood in two trots, trumped its hooves, and they demanded a third source. Dissatisfaction with the status quo among voters and a repeal of new ideas have historically given rise to new political parties. An examination of one of those moments in history reveals key factors that brought forth a third-party candidate in 1992, presidential race of Ross Perot. And then going on, The Perot versus Clinton Bush presidential campaign election drew masses to the polls. Ross highlighted issues of the importance to the public, limiting foreign imports. So these are what his campaigns were. Limiting foreign imports, decreasing U.S. involvement around the world, and raising the gas line tax. So all of these, besides really the gas line tax, are things Trump was running on. And Trump is doing a lot of tariffs, especially towards China, as China and the U.S. are in the midst of a trade war. And although Perot maybe not necessarily was doing that because it was not necessarily needed at the time, they were both very big on limiting how much impact foreign imports have. And that's one of the things I want to bring up in this video, is that although Ross Perot happened so much earlier, there is a lot of similarities between Ross Perot and Donald Trump, especially in the way they act. They were outsiders to the political sphere, and it was almost refreshing to see. And a lot of people think Ross Perot gained a good amount of votes because they believed in Ross Perot as a person, and they were able to see clearly what he stood for. There was bizarre but yet quotes that displayed his real feelings and real issues, similar to what Donald Trump did in his campaign, even though Donald Trump is much more of a crazier type of candidate, very much more vocal in a bizarre way. So that was kind of the Ross Perot quotes that were highlighted real quickly in my article of Will There Be a Greater Party in the 2020 election? And I'm not necessarily going to answer that question, and that wasn't the point to the video as a whole, but I just wanted to bring up the point that Ross Perot and Trump had a lot of similarities between each other. And it is somewhat sad to see someone go like Ross Perot, because Ross Perot was very refreshing to see. Even though I didn't live in the time period, my parents and many other adults that I know did live in that time period. And a lot of them were refreshed to see someone different like Ross Perot compared to the average politician like George H.W. Bush, or especially the incumbent of Bill Clinton. So there's a lot of similarities, as I've already mentioned, and I think Trump won in a large part because he used Ross Perot's type of campaign attitude and campaign strategy. He was able to see what Ross Perot did. And one key difference that Trump did what Ross Perot didn't is Trump ran under a major party. He ran under the Republican Party. And Ross Perot ran under his own Reform Party as a third-party candidate. A lot of people I've heard argue that if he would have ran under, let's say, the Republican Party and won and would have been the general debatee of Clinton, and there wouldn't be a three-person race, that Perot could very much have won. Now, this is all skeptical and not proven, as obviously this alternative universe never happened, but it would be very interesting to see if Ross Perot would have been the first candidate like Trump was. But now Trump claims that position as being the first kind of businessman, outspokenish figure as Trump is. And I'm almost a little saddened to see Ross Perot, even though we haven't heard very much from him in the past. What he was able to show in history was that Americans truly are looking for someone in a presidential election who seems honest and who you legitimately believe as a person. And I do think that Ross Perot was able to do that, similar to what Trump was able to do in a different way. But the Democrats need to be self-aware if they want to win the election. They need someone who comes across as genuine. And right now, they're not coming across as genuine.